What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Young Guns podcast. And today we have ourselves another episode. It's going to be the Metro Division predictions for this year's 2023-2024 NHL season. In the last video, we talked about the Atlantic Division and about the Atlantic teams. So if you guys want to check that video out, go check that one out. It was a long video, but it was definitely fun to record. So definitely go check it out. And just getting into this video straight away, we are going to be talking about all 8 teams in the Metro Division. So we're going to be starting off, from the top. So we're going to be going in alphabetical order. So we're going to be starting off with the Carolina Hurricanes. And what's interesting about the Carolina Hurricanes, just to kind of get into this, is they were a team that a lot of people talked about during the offseason. They were a team that made some moves, but they were also a team that was very interesting because they had a guy that was on the trading block that ended up not being traded in Brett Pesce. And there was a lot of talk about, was he going to be moved? Was he not going to be moved? What was going to happen with Brett Pesce? Ultimately, he ends up staying, and they confirmed today officially that he will be staying and that they're not looking to trade him anymore. So that is going to be that's going to be interesting. However, they did add some other players to their team. They added Michael Bunting on a 3-year deal. They added Brendan Lemieux. They brought back Tony DeAngelo in a deal that included that was a trade that included a couple of prospect and a pick. They also brought in Caleb Jones, and they signed Dmitry Orlov to a big monster deal, $7.75 million for the next 2 years. The key departures, there's a few that are interesting. Max Pacioretty, who didn't really do well in his time in Carolina. Obviously, didn't play much. Dealt with a lot of injuries, including an Achilles injury that kept him out for a while. Paul Stastny's gone, as well as Calvin DeHaan and Shane Gostisbehere. So those are mainly the big names that have gone and come in. And in terms of just what their forward core looks like going into this season, as of right now, the top line looks like that with Bunting, Aho, and Jarvis. And then if you go down the list, you can see the depth that they have on this team. Taravainen currently listed on the fourth line. I'm not sure if that's going to last. And then obviously, if you look at their decor, just look how stacked that decor is. One of the best decors in the league. And just to get into it, they have 3 goaltenders that they've signed: Freddie Anderson, Antti Ranta, and obviously Peter Kochetkov. That's going to be a big question mark for all 3. Who's going to start? And are they going to roll with 3 goaltenders this season? That's going to be a big question mark for the Carolina Hurricanes. So, Zach, what are your thoughts on Carolina this season? Where do you see them finishing, and what's your prediction essentially for this team, and considering how well they've done over the last couple of years?
Well, I think this is a team that should repeat as a playoff team as they've been for the past couple of seasons. And this might not be a sexy take, but I think they'll be once again the division leader. I look at this team and I see a lot of talent. Yes, their forward group. If you look at their forward production last year, they ranked about 16th in the league. They add a Michael Bunting to a deal that monetarily doesn't make the most sense, but I still think Michael Bunting could has a scoring ability and can chip in. And it's good that they'll have him on the top line because he really kind of embodies that third man energy player, kind of like a Tom Wilson for the Caps. So they add that. They bring back Jordan Stahl and Jesper Fast, who are two integral players for them. And then if you look at their decor, now they have 3 stacked pairings. They add Dmitry Orlov for a 2-year deal where a lot of people were like, this is not necessary. And they do that move and people think, okay, well now Brett Pesce's out the door. But they made it all work, and now it looks like they're going to be cap compliant for the start of the season. And they bring back Tony DeAngelo, who had a lot of success there. And who could play on the power play for them. So their special teams, I think, are going to be really strong because you look at that decor and you have a Brent Burns, you have a Dmitry Orlov and a Tony DeAngelo who could really get it done for you. And not to name Sebastian Aho, who they re-signed for the max term and just under $10 million. With the cap going up, that looks like a very good deal. He is a number 1 center in this league, and he's still in his mid-20s. And so this just makes so much sense for him. that just shows that there's a lot of belief in the system there. It's believe in the system. Rob Brindamore uh, has had a lot of success there, and the players love playing for him. And now their goaltenders are coming back, Freddie Anderson and Antti Ranta, like you mentioned. And that's good enough to take you to the playoffs. I know they had Freddie Anderson get hurt last year, and Ranta had to step in, but these are two goalies who are very serviceable, and I expect them to be first in the division. And if injuries are not a problem for them, they could go far once again in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think for Carolina, the biggest thing for me, I think, is consistency. I think for the last couple of years, they've done really, really well at being consistent, which I think ultimately puts them, in the upper echelon of the league in terms of just how good they are. But one of the things is that for me, I think, like you mentioned, it's going to be their goaltending, right? They've got a lot of depth, like you mentioned. Their decor is one of the best in the league, if not the best in the league. For me, it's whether or not their goaltender is going to be healthy, and Freddie Anderson and Antti Ranta. I think they're going to challenge with another team in this Metro division for top spot. I have Carolina actually going second, not first. I'm going to get to into why I believe the team that I believe is going to finish first, but I think Carolina is going to be up there. I think they're going to definitely lead the Metro first or second. But I have them second. I think there's going to be one team that's going to edge them out.
Yeah,
So
there's been
moving
some
on,
chatter, not to cut you
yeah,
off, but
go.
there's been some chatter off camera about how we feel and who we think is going to lead that division. So it's gonna be nice to get into that debate after.
Yeah, for sure. But just moving on here a little bit, we're going to be going to the Columbus Blue Jackets, who have been in the news recently, and not necessarily in the most positive way. If you look at Carolina, Columbus. What's interesting about them is they added two key defensemen this offseason. They added Ivan Provorov, and they also added Damon Severson. And what's interesting about that is that we look at the Columbus Blue Jackets. They're a very solid team that's you know had their struggles in the last couple of years. I think they've struggled to find ways to win hockey games, but for the most part, I mean, on paper they're solid. They're not a bad team. It's just that there's other teams in the Metro that are better. But if you go look at again like what they've added versus what they've gotten rid of, they haven't really gotten rid of anybody. They've kept their team intact. They've signed some defensemen. They've kept their forward core, and obviously they hired Mike Babcock, and then now he's gone, and they've now brought in Pascal Vincent. But for the most part, I mean, you know, Columbus pretty much stays the same. If you look at their forward core, young team, they drafted Adam Fantilli, who's going to be a big part of their future over there. I think their top six looks okay. Kirill Marchenko, who was announced today that he's going to be day to day, so he may not be there for the start of training camp. He had a really good year last year. Ken Johnson, I think they're expecting a little bit more out of, but that top six is good enough to compete with some pretty decent teams in the Metro. I don't know if it's a playoff caliber top six, but it's definitely a decent top six nonetheless. Then you look at their bottom six, and I think that's where they're lacking. I don't know about their depth down the bottom six. I think that's one thing that compared to every other team in the division, I think they lack, right? They have Cole Sillinger, who struggled over the last couple of years. Roslovic hasn't really found his footing. And then that fourth line is a lot of uncertainty. I know they get Alex Texier back after missing a year, but is Columbus going to be able to keep up with their third and fourth line? I'm not sure compared to other teams in the Metro. Then you look at their decor, and this is where it gets interesting. They've bolstered their decor, and I think their decor is actually very underrated. You've got Werenski and Severson, who are two very solid defensemen. Provorov, who had his issues in Philly, but he's still a decent defenseman alongside Andrew Peak, and then Goodbranson and Boakfist. It's a solid top six. There's also David Juracek, who could crack the roster this year as well. So he's an interesting one for Columbus. So it's a decent team, definitely in terms of their decor, and then just a net. Just to finish it off, they have Elvis Merzlikins and Danil Tarasov, who is currently injured. So the expectation is he'll probably be there for the start of the season, but they're unsure. So for me, Columbus haven't really done a whole lot to really sway people into believing that they're a playoff team. But one thing that I could say about Columbus is they've always been that team that you shouldn't underestimate, because they've proven people wrong before. And I think the last year wasn't as a compliment to how I don't think they were as bad as people give them credit for. I think they dealt with a lot of injuries. I don't think their coach Brad Larson was necessarily that good. I think this year under a fresh start with some better players and the fact that their decor got better, if they can stay healthy, I think they could be a team that can challenge in the Metro. Maybe even teams like the Islanders. But to me personally, if you had to ask me my opinion today, I think they're probably closer to the Islanders, but I'm gonna have Columbus going seventh in the Metro Division. I think they're gonna be in the mix. They're definitely gonna be a team not to underestimate, but I don't think they have enough on that bottom six, and I'm not sure about Elvis Merzlikins to say that they're a team that's going to challenge for the playoffs, in my opinion.
Well, on the contrary, I believe this is a team that wants to compete for the playoffs. They bring in Mike Babcock. It didn't work out. He didn't get the coaching game for them, and we obviously know the reason why there. But
Yeah,
what your intention behind that is bringing a guy who's proven, who's won a Stanley Cup before, who's coached Team Canada at the Olympics and at the World Cup, and who's a proven results guy. Forget about his character and how he treats players. This guy wins in this league. So they bring him in, and soon after they're acquiring a Severson, and if you scroll down to their decor over there, they bring in
yeah,
Ivan Provorov also, and those moves, especially with that decor being probably one of the worst units, if not the worst in the NHL last year. They bring in those guys, and they're looking to get better. And there's two proven veteran players. You have Johnny Gaudreau, who they brought in last year, and who showed he's still him. He's still elite. You have Patrick Laine, who, when he's motivated, can still get you those 30 goals pretty consistently. And they get the boost drafting early. I know Blue Jackets fans really wanted to win the Connor Bedard sweepstakes, but look, you get Adam Fantilli, who's a guy who has a lot of size and skill, and who apparently is ready to go this year and be a producer at the NHL level. And you add in some young guys like Ken Johnson, Cole Sillinger, and the defenseman who they drafted in the first round the year prior. Remind me of his name. I'm having a
David Juracek.
Juracek. Sorry, I had a hard time pronouncing that name. And who I think is going to crack the lineup this year. So that it's a good mix of young players that have a lot of upside and a lot of veterans. Obviously, Zach Werenski is. I don't know what other people believe, but I think he's a true top pairing defenseman in this league, and I'm happy he's the guy they kept over Seth Jones, if I'm being honest. Um,
Yeah,
and then their goaltenders, Merzlikins, who I think is very talented, but who lacks consistently. I think that's the only really question mark with this team. Everywhere else, I see talent all over the place, but the problem is the Eastern Conference, and not just the Atlantic, because when you're battling for those playoff spots, you're not just the Metro. I mean, when you're battling for those playoff spots, you're battling with the teams in the Atlantic Division as well. So I think if they were in the West, they would compete for a playoff spot, but I just don't see it in the East. But I think it's going to be very very close to the end, and I'm not surprised. I won't be surprised at all if this team is close to 40 wins.
interesting. Just coming off of what Zach was saying, I mean, if you look at everything that the Columbus Blue Jackets are at the moment, I mean, they're a solid team. I think they're young, but they're at a point in their career now where they're just not ready yet. They're not ready to take that next step. If you go look at the New Jersey Devils here, guys, as we kind of get into it a little bit, the Devils are an interesting team. They've added some key guys. They've added Tyler Toffoli and Colin Miller, who are two decent players, who have played some big hockey for their teams. In the past, Tyler Toffoli, we all know what he's capable of in Calgary. What he was capable of in Calgary. Colin Miller, who played a couple of years in Buffalo and in Dallas. The expectation with him. So there's definitely some excitement there. And then if you go look at the key departures, I mean, there's Jesper Boqvist, there's Igor Sharangovich, there's Miles Wood, there's Ryan Graves, all guys that are big players, but they obviously left the team with Mackenzie Blackwoods, Damon Severson, Ryan Graves, Miles Wood. All these guys are big players that have left. So New Jersey's lost a lot of key guys, but At the end of the day, they've still been able to, become a solid team. They've built a decent team. They've built a decent roster, and this is a team that last year competed in the playoffs. They did a very good job when they were there in terms of being able to compete. And yeah, so I think that's going to be very, very interesting. And then obviously the other thing too that's pretty interesting about the Devils is if you go look at their team is you know there's Timo Meyer, there's Nico Hischier, there's Dawson Mercer. They have obviously Jack Hughes, Tyler Toffoli, Jesper Bratt. They have Andre Palat. They have Eric Halla. They have Alex Holtz. Like this is a really good, really young team that dominated and played really really well during the regular season and during the playoffs last year. They showed exactly why they were one of the best teams in the league. And when they added Timo Meyer, I know he struggled last year being able to come in as a Devils player, but he ended up, I think, this year under a fresh start. I think he's expected to come in and potentially do better. But if you look at just the top nine in New Jersey, man, is just really really well balanced. They have a really good team, a mix of skill and just toughness and just a lot of really good talented players. I don't see how this team, at least offensively, is going to get stopped by anybody. And then if you look at their D pairing, I mean, look, I know they're not the most elite team on defense. They lost Damon Severson, which was a big loss. But Jonas Siegenthaler has been an underrated defenseman for so many years. There's Dougie Hamilton, who again, solid defensemen. Luke Hughes and John Marino, who have been solid defensemen. Kevin Ball and Brendan Smith, who are still not the most unproven players, but they're still decent. And then obviously, if you look at their goaltending situation, they have Vitek Vanacek and Akira Schmid, who had really good opportunities when they were in the playoffs last year for the Devils. So obviously for New Jersey, for me, I think they're the best team in the league. I know, like I said before, if you have to compare just defensemen, I think New Jersey obviously got weaker on defense. But with the addition of Luke Hughes, I think this is a team that can definitely do it. I think this is a team that has a lot of skill, a lot of talent, and I think they're going to be the team that's going to challenge Carolina. And like Zach mentioned, alluded to before, um, you know, this was an internal debate between us three in the group, but I personally and strongly believe in New Jersey. I believe in their system. I believe in their team. I think they're going to be the best team in the Metro this year. I have them finishing first and atop of the Metro. So, Zach, what do you think? And welcome back.
Yes, sorry about that. The point across there. Um, so if I look at this team here, I think they're going to do a lot more of what they were good at last year. So they bring in Tyler Toffoli, who's a proven goal scorer, and he's done it for many hockey clubs now. And you add him next to Jack Hughes, and I see him as the guy that could get you 30 goals. And I see a lot of speed, skill, and just overall gamers up top for them. And this should be another year with a potent offense. But then I look at that decor, and you mentioned the guys they lost, but I don't really trust Dougie Hamilton as a top defenseman. I really think he's overrated. His 5-on-5 defensive play is not that great. Yes, he's good on the power play, and you look at him on the stat sheet. This guy will get you 55, 60 points a year, and he'll contribute a lot of offense. But their defense is really a liability. And with two goalies, I know who Vanacek, who one of them who took them to the playoffs last year. I still think that the goaltending situation is a question mark if this team is going to be a legit contender. And you add into the fact that they have a pretty average decor for the most part. I just don't think they'll be better in the playoffs. I still think they're a really dynamic team. I think they'll be really good in the regular season, but I think top to bottom, Carolina is so good and they're so structured that they'll even top them in the regular season. So I have this team finishing second in the division for those reasons.
Yeah, and I think for me the only real thing with New Jersey is obviously, and I mentioned it before while you were in here, but they lost a lot of key guys: Sharon Govich, Miles Wood, Ryan Graves, and obviously Mackenzie Blackwood, and Jesper Boqvist as well. But this is a team that last year it just felt like everything was going right for them, and they were playing such a really good system that I think ultimately they showed that they were capable of of competing and being at the top level. And I think if you have to look at both Carolina and New Jersey, I think New Jersey offensively is just a better team. I think they have the better offense. I think their top nine is better, and I think ultimately that might make the difference. But you're right. There are question marks with New Jersey, especially in net and especially on that decor because Vanacek had a good year last year, but there's no expectation. There's no expectation that he'll be able to do it again. And there's also no belief that he can or will, be at the level that he was last year. So that's going to be a very interesting situation. But if you look at the rookies, just to crack the lineup, obviously we mentioned Luke Hughes. Don't sleep on Simon Nemec last year, who had a really good, really good AHL season. I know people looked at his points and were, fairly disappointed with him points wise. But I think he was solid. I mean, I've watched him play a few times in Utica against Utica, being a Laval Rocket fan and watching them quite often. He was solid, man. And I think that if he's given an opportunity to crack this NHL roster, I think he'll definitely help the New Jersey Devils out. But for me, I think New Jersey finishes first, and I believe that they're gonna, just edge it out. But it's gonna be close between both Carolina and New Jersey.
What do you think? What do you think edges them out for them over Carolina this year? If we were to get into that right now.
The offense. I think the offense is what puts me over the edge because I know that Carolina's got good goaltending, right? They've got Anderson, they've got Kachetkov, and they obviously have Ranta. But with Carolina, there's always uncertainty in net, right? Ranta can't stay healthy, Anderson can't stay healthy, and Kachetkov, last year he was good, but he had moments where he struggled, right? And so I think for Carolina, there's a lot of uncertainty in net as well. At least with New Jersey, you had Vanacek who, played really well for the most of the regular season, and then they came in and Akira Schmidt played really well. And obviously for me, I think with New Jersey, they're kind of in the same boat defensively, but then you look at the decor, obviously Carolina edges it out because they're the best defensive team in the league, but offensively, I just think New Jersey has more depth. And I think that ultimately in a playoff environment or even just fighting for the playoffs during 82 games, I think you're going to need the depth a lot more. And I know Carolina's got it, but with New Jersey, it just feels like you can take guys out of the lineup and add them back in, and nothing's going to change. I think they're still going to be the same. So that's why. It's just the fact that I really, really like their offensive core. And I think that they're so good offensively, just on paper and just as a team as a whole, that I just believe that they're going to beat Carolina. I could be wrong, and I could be wrong, and Carolina can absolutely finish first. But I'm just very high on the Devils, and I hopped on their hype train last year, and I'm gonna stick to it for this year, at least for now. So that's
Yeah,
that's
well,
my
that's
reasoning.
honestly a good take, but I think this team is just too spotty in certain areas of the game
Yeah,
that I think it's gonna get exposed, especially in their divisional matchups against teams like Carolina and other potent teams in the Metro. And Carolina is just a powerhouse all around. And just like New Jersey got better at what they do, Carolina's defensive play is just going to improve. They get a guy, like I said, back in D'Angelo and Dmitry Orlov. This team is going to move the puck. They're going to suffocate you in the neutral zone, and they're probably going to have more time of possession and create more 5-on-5 chances than the teams they play against. So it's just going to be
for
a
sure.
nightmare to play them. And regardless of their average offensive tallies or not, they still have really good players in there like Sebastian Aho, and they have the players that the elite players and the players who are on the come up that could get it done for them. So I don't want to bet against this team. I don't like betting against their coach who makes this team so structured every year. He's kind of, for me, he's like kind of like the Bill Belichick but of hockey. And so I'm sticking with them as the division leader.
Yeah, and we're gonna be moving on now to the next team, and actually, this is probably one of the more interesting topics, just because this team always seems to not underestimate, but I feel like people always expect more from them, right? And then they haven't never end up delivering, and that's the New
I
York
think it's the
Islanders.
opposite. I think
Really?
last year people didn't expect them to make the playoffs, but Sorokin was so good,
Yeah,
right?
but I think the issue with the Islanders, and I'm gonna get into it, is just they build this team, and if you look at their roster, right, and look at the acquisitions that they've made in. Obviously, they brought in Julian Gauthier. They didn't really lose anybody. They re-signed Engvall. They re-signed Sorokin to that big deal. But if you look at their roster, like this isn't a bad roster. It's not wow. It's not fantastic, but it's not bad, right? Obviously, Matt Barzal and Bo Horvat, two really good players. Wallstrom's had his moments. They're expecting him to potentially make the big jump. Their second line is pretty good. I mean, Brock Nelson's underrated. He had a really good year last year. Anders Lee, the expectation is that, this is a guy that can get back to scoring 25, 30, 30 goals in a season. Kyle Palmieri's always been an underrated player, but they've just it's because of the fact that they've played a certain system that is very, very boring to a lot of people. They've had a lot of success, but at the same time, I think for a lot of people, everybody's wanted to see the Islanders take that next step, right? Whether it was acquiring a star player or whether it was, getting more scoring. And I just feel like they haven't done that. I feel like Lamoriello failed this team in a lot of ways because he kept the team intact. He stayed put for a lot of it. And it's a little bit frustrating, I think, if you're an Islanders fan, because this is a team that's got potential. Like they've got potential to be, really good. If you look at their decor, it's underrated as well, man. Pellick and Pulak are, two of the best
Great
defensemen in
shutdown
the
pairing.
league, you know? And then you have Noah Dobson, who's very, very good and one of the most underrated defensemen in the league. And then you have Romanov, who, on his day and he's a good puck moving defenseman. He can throw the body. He's a guy who's got top four potential. And then you have one of the best goaltenders in the league in Ilya Sorokin. And Varlamov is not a bad backup to have. So the problem with the Islanders has always been about putting the puck in the net. And so I think for me, this is a team that I honestly, personally, myself, expected a lot more during the offseason and expected a lot more just in general in terms of making moves to try to make this team better. And it just didn't seem like they did enough to really convince me. Like this is a team that hasn't changed. And so for that reason, I have to put them sixth place in the Metro because I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. I don't think with how well every other team's improved and just with the fact that Lamoriello stayed put, they're going to be fighting with Columbus for, sixth and seventh in the Metro. It's going to be close between those two, but I just don't see the Islanders, being in that playoff run. And the reason I say that is because, as much as they have a good goaltender in Ilya Sorokin, and as much as their defense is good, they cannot score. These guys can't score. If their life depended on it, they can't score. And so for that reason, I have the Islanders in sixth. So what's your thoughts on that? But I personally don't think the Islanders are good enough to be in the conversation.
Well, listen, I think they have one line that could score consistently, and that's the Horvat Barzal line. And if you mix
Yeah,
them around, it might not even be a good thing. On the second line, yes, you have Anders Lee, who's a proven sniper, and Brock Nelson and Kyle Palmieri, but I don't think that's a good second line, especially against the teams they're going to be playing against. That could be even comparable to their third lines in most cases. And then, yes, you got Jean-Gabriel Pageau and all those guys that are gritty in the bottom six, but that's not going to do you wonders when you're looking to score goals.
yeah,
And that's also a reason why Sorokin had to steal so many games for them last year. And I look at it this way, Luca. It's to be a playoff team in the East, I think you need to secure 45 wins. And I don't think this
yeah.
team gives enough offensively for them to secure 45 wins unless
Agreed.
Sorokin has this 2015 Carey Price Hart Trophy winner, and full-on MVP type season for them. Their decor is good. They have that great shutdown pairing, and then they're complemented with some pretty good pieces. And obviously, Sorokin is there, who's in the top three conversation. That's not the problem. The problem is this team can't score goals. They play this brand of hockey that probably would have won them the Stanley Cup in the 90s, and it's had some success for them now. But I think they have to get more dynamic. And they have a GM in Lamoriello who, we're kind of happy that he didn't make a blockbuster trade this summer because he's really a shot fighter, and it could be hit or miss with him. And I think he did miss a little bit in some of the smaller moves, like bringing back defenseman Mayfield for some term and $3.5 million for the guy who's going to be the third man on the right side for years to come. To me, that just even with the cap going up potentially, I think a move like that just doesn't make too much sense. They didn't, and then there's the lack of other moves to improve this team in the offseason. I know they put a lot into that Bo Horvat trade earlier during the season, but then you sign a guy like Pierre Engvall for 7 years, a guy who's already in his late 20s. That just doesn't make a lot of sense to me
Yeah.
in the long run. And I don't really trust how they're building this hockey team. There's some pieces that I really like their goaltending, their sturdy decor, and I love the Horvat trade, to be honest. But it's just this team is not enough. Um,
Yeah.
and for those reasons, I don't have them making the playoffs. I think there are 5 teams in the Metro that are more dynamic to them, and that's not to count the other teams in the Atlantic Division.
Yeah, so for sure, I think we both agree that they're going to finish at least sixth in the Metro. It might be lower, but I think that they're probably better than Columbus. But I think those two teams could be interchangeable between the Islanders and
Yeah,
Columbus.
I think it's a coin
I
flip
want
with Columbus, and the next team we haven't covered yet is obviously going to be our last pick in the division. We'll get into that later.
Yeah, so moving on to the other team from New York, we've already covered New Jersey and the Islanders. We're going to cover the New York Rangers now. This is a team that, did some interesting things during the offseason. So I wouldn't say they added a lot or a lot of key pieces, but they made some acquisitions. So they brought in Nick Bonino, they brought in Blake Wheeler, they brought in Jonathan Quick, Eric Gustafson, and obviously Tyler Pitlick. Their key departures remained obviously Patrick Kane, Tyler Mott, and the big one being Vladimir Tarasenko, who ended up going to Ottawa. And they obviously re-signed Alexis Lafreniere, Keandre Miller, and Zach Jones. Just looking at their line combinations, I mean, this is a team that we've criticized for a long time because of the fact that they've had so much star power and they haven't always been able to utilize it properly. And a lot of that had to do with, Alexis Lafreniere. But looking at the fact that they have a new coach, in Peter Laviolette, who's come in, um, who's pretty decent with rookies. I wouldn't say he's fantastic, but he's good enough. And seeing the success that he's had with other teams in previous years, I think the Rangers are in a decent position here. They've got Chris Kreider, who 2 years ago scored 50 goals. I think the expectation is that he's going to be a key part of their team. You got Mika Zibanejad, you have Capo Kako, who I think everyone's expecting a big season out of. You have Artemi Panarin and Vincent Trocheck. Now, I think, personally speaking, Lafreniere is going to end up on the second line and Blake Wheeler is going to end up on the third line, but that could be interchangeable. I really want to see Alexis Lafreniere on the second line. I think if the Rangers can throw him there and give him an opportunity, I think he can thrive in it. But just in general, I think the Rangers' top nine, again, kind of similar to New Jersey, is just very, very good. They have good offense. The only concern that I have is that this is a team that, again, is they look good on paper, but can they put it all together during the regular season? Last year they had good moments, but they struggled a lot too. And obviously, if you look at their decor a little bit, it's pretty fascinating as well. They have Ryan Lindgren and Adam Fox. They have Keandre Miller and Jacob Trouba. But then their top six is not the best, and Eric Gustafson and Braden Schneider. The Rangers are going to be reliant a lot on Adam Fox and Ryan Lindgren. And as much as Keandre Miller is really good and Jacob Trouba, their top four is good, but is it good enough to sustain a full 82 game season and be able to compete with the likes of Carolina, New Jersey, Pittsburgh, Washington? I think it is. But I think they adding a top six defenseman would have probably been a key priority during the season that I think they missed out on. I'm not too big on Eric Gustafson for that reason. And then obviously in net, they have Igor Shesterkin and Jonathan Quick. Again, Shesterkin, I think, is going to end up playing 65, 70 games this year. I'd be surprised if Quick gets more than 20. He struggled last year with Vegas. Although he won a cup, he wasn't really the reason they won the cup. But he got himself a cup and he's got playoff experience. So I think that's going to help for the Rangers. But ultimately, I don't know where to put this team. I'm going to be completely honest. I like their forward core. I think their defense is good, not great. And obviously, they have an elite goaltender in net in Igor Shesterkin. For me, it's a toss-up between these guys and another team that we're going to cover soon. But I'm honestly just thinking about it right now. I'm going to make a bold take here. I think they're going to finish fourth in the division. And people might hate me on this, and they might be like, why do you think that? I think there's another team that, I don't think you can sleep on after what the offseason they've had. But I just think that the Rangers are going to be in a very tough Metro division. And seeing as the fact that, they've lost Patrick Kane and Tarasenko, and with a new coaching system, I just don't know how well they're going to be able to do. And although Igor Shesterkin is a very good goaltender and they have a very good team on paper, I think that you need to build team chemistry. And I think that you also need to have a situation where you have good guys in the locker room. And we all know that Blake Wheeler's had his moments in Winnipeg. I don't know what type of player he's going to be in New York, and what type of locker room atmosphere he's going to bring. So I think for that reason, there's just a lot of change in New York in terms of just the coaching staff, but also some of the players being added in, that I think they're ultimately going to struggle. That's my hot take for now. I think the Rangers are going to finish fourth in this division. What do you think, Zach?
Okay, so I agree with a lot of what you said, and just to go back to the points you made on Capo Caco and Alexis Lafreniere, I think those guys, you just have to let them fly. I think those guys have a lot to give, and I think being trusted in more critical situation, getting more game time. I really liked for Capo Caco to be a consistent guy on that top line, and Alexis Lafreniere to potentially move up the lineup. But I like what they did, obviously, with Blake Wheeler. He signs a deal that's close to the minimum in this league, and he's still a good top six option that you can rely upon. So look, their high end talent is great, and they know their high end talent is great. It's been great for the past couple of years. Obviously, Artemi Panarin, Mika Zibanejad, Chris Kreider, and Vincent Trocheck. You can't go wrong with those guys. They proved it last year and years prior. But you gotta add in some flavor with the other guys, and you have to make sure that those your top guys, that they're fresh for the playoffs. Because I feel like this team, every time they get into the postseason, you're having subpar playoff performances by Mika Zibanejad and Panarin, for instance. And I think it's because they overplayed these guys in the regular season. Panarin and Zibanejad play about 20 minutes a night in the regular season. That figure should go down for this team's success later in the season. And you have guys like Lafreniere and Kako, especially last year. Kako played really well down the stretch. They just let these guys go, let them help out. Um, so I'm interested to see how Coach Peter Laviolette is going to approach this. I think he's smart, and I think he knows how to get the most out of teams for at least the first 1 or 2 years of his 10 years, and then after he kind of goes off the rails. And he's good enough to bring them team back to the playoffs. But with the two divisions, like we always mentioned, they're so strong. I don't have them as the third spot in the Metro, but I do think more likely than not that they're going to make it as a wild card, because I still really like this team. I just love their top guys. Period. I think they have a brand of hockey that works in the regular season. They generate a lot of offense, but because of their lack in some areas of the game, I think their depth scoring has to improve, and I think their backup goaltending situation is going to have to improve, and that's kind of going to be my hot take with them, is that I think Jonathan Quick, I don't know how much he has left to give. He didn't really play much I know he got his ring, but he didn't really play much with Vegas, and then you're going to really be relying on Shesterkin to play 60 to 65 games. I think he's capable, but I don't think it's a recipe for long-term success. So I'm worried about that. But I still have them as a team that I think with an 80% chance will make it into the postseason as a wild card.
Yeah, I think they're gonna, like I said, I think they're gonna be fourth in the division. I think they're a team that, like you said before, I think they're good enough to be in the top four and potentially in the wild card race. I just don't know that they're top three caliber. I think there's better teams there, and for that reason, I think that they're gonna end up finishing fourth in the division. But I want to move on to the next team that I think everybody is anticipating, but everyone kind of already expects this team to pretty much go where they're supposed to be, and that's the Philadelphia Flyers. I mean, they've done a lot of very interesting things this offseason, and some things that I'm, curious to see how it pans out. So, first things first, they brought in Garnet Hathaway. Um, you know, they made that interesting signing. They obviously traded away Ivan Provorov. They acquired Sean Walker and Cal Peterson from the LA Kings, Ryan Poehling, and obviously Mark Stahl as well. They got rid of Kevin Hayes, who was traded to St. Louis. James Van Riemsdyk is gone. Tony DeAngelo was bought out. Ivan Provorov, who we mentioned, got traded. And then obviously in terms of the guys they re-signed, Noah Cates, who had a really good year last year, Samuel Urson, and Cam York. And then some guys who can crack the roster, and Bobby Brink and Tyson Forrester. This is a team that just, look, the guys, they're rebuilding. I mean, straight up, you know, they have some decent players. Joel Farabee, I think, is a guy that's going to look to do well. Is Sean Couturier going to be able to play this season? And if he is he going to be healthy enough to play a full season and turn into the player that he was 2 years ago? There's a question mark there. Konechny, who's been in trade rumors, is he going to stay the full season? Are they going to try to flip him potentially closer to the deadline? Cam Atkinson, who last year suffered an injury, how's he going to do? And obviously Owen Tippett as well is another one that I think people are looking at. And then Morgan Frost is expected to have a big year for the Philadelphia Flyers. But ultimately, this team just isn't good enough just on paper. I don't think they're the best offensive team. I think every team in the Metro is better than them offensively. Maybe the Islanders, you can argue, is as good, but even at that, I think the Islanders, have a lot more chemistry compared to Philly. And not only that, I think their system is a little bit more sustainable compared to what Philly has done under Tortorella last year. Obviously, their big question mark as well goes on defense. Their defense is very weak, right? Travis Sanheim and Ristolainen. Ristolainen's not the best defenseman. Travis Sanheim's pretty good. Then you have Mark Stahl and Cam York. Mark Stahl's at the end of his career. Cam York is still, not established yet in the NHL. Maybe he could take the step up this year and potentially be a good top four defenseman for them. That's the expectation, at least. And then you have Sean Walker, who's a decent underrated defenseman and a good top six defenseman with Nick Seeler. Their top six, at least their bottom pair defensive core is decent. It's nothing to write home about. And then obviously in net, they have Carter Hart, Cal Peterson, and then they obviously also have Samuel Urson, who they re-signed. But Carter Hart, I think the expectation for him is that he's going to have a bounce back year. If he can bounce back, I think Philly might be able to steal a couple of games here and there, maybe make the games closer than they're supposed to be. But ultimately, there just isn't much on this team to really be excited about, other than the fact that they're rebuilding, and they've openly said it. Obviously, they have some elite talent coming up through the pipes. Matvei Michkov in a couple of years, Bobby Brink and Tyson Forster. But as of right now, this looks like a really just, a rebuilding team, and a team that is going to finish dead last in the Metro and probably be in the Macklin Celebrini sweepstakes by the end of the year.
Yeah, I think this is a team that's in the beginning phase of their rebuild, just because of how they manage the cap and how they've tried to stay competitive in previous seasons. Look, you have to look at it this way. With a player like Travis Konechny, he's in the prime of his career. Does the player want to stay there and go through the waiting process? There's players that have waited for those 4 or 5 seasons. They've been top producers, but their teams haven't made the playoffs, and then they wait for that for everything to fall into place around them. So it all depends on him if he wants to get moved. If he gets moved, he'll probably be one of the biggest trade chips at the trade deadline this year, and could command a prospect first round pick and more. Obviously, you have some guys that are just riding it out. Like, for instance, Mark Stahl. They add him to a team because there's a spot available. I don't think Mark Stahl is a great player. I don't think he was ever that great of a player, in my opinion. And where the way the league is trending, Mark Stahl in your top four is not ideal. But he did play well for Mark Stahl standards last year in Florida, so he gets that contract, and they're just filling up a spot. And some of their other free agent signings, they kind of went by the same thing. They know they're rebuilding. They know this team is going to bad. They have some good trade pieces. I think their goaltending situation is actually pretty good, so it's going to be a challenge for them getting over Cal Peterson and Carter Hart. I think it's going to be a good challenge for them to be getting a lot of shots in every night. Other than that, I don't think there's much more to be covered than what you said. They're a rebuilder. They're going to be in the sweepstakes for potentially the first overall pick next year, depending on how where they land in the standings and how the draft lottery goes for them. And they're gonna bottom out the Metro Division.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't think there's really much else to really write home about. Bottom of the division, not really too impressed other than that. Let's move on to probably the most anticipated team going into this offseason, the team that did the most amount of moves out of any teams in the NHL, and that's the Pittsburgh Penguins. And some of the moves they made were absolutely fantastic. They brought in Nola. First of all, let's start with the fact that they brought in Kyle Dubas
Love
as
it. I
GM
absolutely love
and
it.
president of hockey operations. That was the big move that they made. And then they decided to proceed with making other big moves. They brought in Nola Chari, Lars Eller, Vinny Hinestroza, Andreas Janssen, Matt Nieto, Rem Pitlick, Riley Smith, Ryan Graves, Eric Carlson, who was the big one in that blockbuster trade with
I mean, come on. He's a
Montreal and
Norris
San
Trophy
Jose.
for Pete's sake.
Yeah.
Keep
Um,
going.
Alex Nadalchevich, and then they traded away some guys as well. They traded away Mikhail Granlund. They got rid of Nick Bonino, Ryan Paling, Jason Zucker, Brian Dumoulin, Dmitry Kulikov, Jeff Petrie, Jan Ruda, and obviously Casey DeSmith, who were involved in the Carlson deal. They re-signed Tristan Jarry and Ty Smith, Andrew O'Connor. But looking at this team, and let's talk about this team. This is a team that is completely changed from last year, like from top to bottom. You know, Riley Smith added in as well. Evgeny Malkin, Brian Rust, Jake Gensel isn't on this list because he's going to be out for the first couple of months of the season, but he's also a guy that you can include. Their bottom six got better with Lars Eller, Matt Nieto, and Nola Chari, Rem Pitlick as well. Their decor got better with Eric Carlson and Ryan Graves added into that team. And then in net, they brought in Alex Nedeljkovic and Tristan Jarry. This is a team that I think this year is destined for a very, very exciting season. And I think they're destined for playoff success. I like what Kyle Dubas has done in the offensive core. I think he's brought in some guys that are underrated. Riley Smith, Stanley Cup winner with Vegas. Lars Eller, who's been fantastic for the Washington Capitals during his time there. Had a brief period with Colorado, which I thought he did really well in. Very good third line center. I think that's a really good pickup. That fourth line, speedy with Rem Pitlick. Just one of the toughest lines to play against, I think, this year is going to be that. Matt Nieto, who's an underrated depth forward. Nola Chari, who we all know what he's capable of, especially during the regular season, but also in the playoffs. I like this team. I really do. And then on defense, I mean, Chris Letang and Ryan Graves, decent pairing. Letang, we all know what he's capable of when healthy. Marcus Pedersen, who last year didn't have the best year, but you know, Eric Carlson, who offensively was a monster. Defensively could be a liability, but he's going to provide some offense to Pittsburgh that I think they need. And then obviously their top six, Chad Ruhwedel and Pierre-Olivier Joseph, nothing to write home about, but not bad under the circumstances. The big question mark in net is going to be, is Alex Nedeljkovic and Tristan Jarry going to be able to hold the fort for the full 82-game season? I think that might be the only concern Pittsburgh has. But I'm a big fan of what they've done. I'm a big fan of the moves they've made. And I think they're going to be the third team in the Metropolitan Division that's going to be better than New York Rangers. They're going to finish third. I like everything they've done. I think they're an underrated team, and I think they're going to prove a lot of people. I think they're going to surprise a lot of people this year.
Yeah, I think I just love what Cal Dubas did, and it just shows that he has a big he has a big pair of balls on him. He's not afraid to swing for the fence like he did in Toronto with the big splash, bringing in John Tavares and other moves he did to make that team competitive. It didn't work out for him in the playoffs. It actually worked out last year at the end of his tenure, but now he's got a fresh start, and I just love the moves he made in the offseason. He wasn't afraid to take a risk and acquire an Eric Carlson, which I don't even think is a risk at this point. This guy, I know he had his injuries at the end of his tenure in Ottawa, obviously after the 2017 postseason run, and he kind of wasn't the same for about 2 or 3 years. And then last year, it looked like he was really back. He looked so fluid out there. His head was right. Physically, he looked like he was incredible. And he gets in a 100-point season, basically passing the puck to and setting up guys like Logan Couture and just dudes. Like there wasn't much there in San Jose. They were one of the worst
True.
teams in the league. They're just dudes, and he got it done, and he won the Norris Trophy with a team that was practically a lottery team, and that's just so impressive in itself. And so you add that to already a Chris Letang, and they got guys who are proven on the left side, like Marcus Patterson, who's been locked up now, Ryan Graves, who they just got this offseason, who is a steady top four defenseman, and so they bolstered that decor, and that decor consistency, injuries, and other issues was a problem for them last year with Jeff Petrie not kind of working the way they wanted. And on offense, they got guys that are going to play that speedy system for them perfectly, and they helped with their bottom six needs, and that's what Cal Dubas did, acquiring Lars Eller and Noel Acciari. For both guys signed for short-term deals under $3 million for each guy, and they're proven players. Noel Acciari is a good bottom six player. Lars Eller is a very good bottom six player and who's won a Stanley Cup and who's been in that third line role and played it to perfection for years now. And you got players like Brian Rust, who was a smart, savvy hockey player. You got Jeff Carter, who's coming back, and you look at it. You got Alex Nylander, who's looking to really establish himself. But even at that, even if he doesn't, we forget about Jake Gensel, who could come back and who's still regarded as an elite goal scorer. And you add Riley Smith, which is one of his first moves. Actually, you add Riley Smith, who just won a Stanley Cup and who should chip in 25 goals. So you're really helping out Gino and Crosby here and giving them some real playmakers to work with. It looks like such a complete team. I don't care what people are saying about the average age of this group and what if this guy gets hurt? What if that guy gets hurt? Look, on paper, this team is so talented, and they have great veterans who are going to lead the way. And I'm banking on the fact that this team is going to be healthy. And if they're healthy, they're 100% a top three team in the division. I know the Tristan Jarry deal is scary because of the term and because of inconsistency, and that's probably the only reason why I'd have them behind the Devils if they don't get consistent goaltending. But I still think this is a great team, and they're going to be looking to get back to the playoffs after so many years being in and 1 year being out, and competing for a Stanley Cup potentially.
Yeah, and I just want to say one last thing. For me, I don't bet against Sidney Crosby. I've never done it, and I'm not going to do it. He's been the best player in the league for a long time. I know now he's not the best player in the league, but he's definitely still top 10 in the league for sure.
It's He's
Um,
still
I
Sidney Crosby
Yeah,
by so many accounts.
that's it. And so I've never bet against Sidney Crosby, and I'm not going to start today. So for that reason, I think just that in itself, I think is one of the main reasons why I think Pittsburgh's going to make the playoffs and do really really well. And let's move on to the final team. And I think another team that could be on the fringe, a team that I think a lot of people are kind of uncertain as to what type of season they're going to have. But they're a fascinating team nonetheless. And if you look at just kind of the moves that they've made, they haven't made many, but the moves they've made, I think, have been smart. They acquired Joel Edmondson and they acquired Max Pacioretty. Edmondson through trade, Pacioretty they signed in free agency, and they didn't really lose many guys. Connor Brown, who was signed with Edmonton, Carl Hagelin, who retired and was injured for most of the year, Connor Sheary, who signed in Tampa, and then Craig Smith and Matt Irwin, who aren't really, big losses for them. And then if you just look at the guys that they re-signed, they locked up Tom Wilson and Martin Ferravari, which is nice for them. So Washington didn't really change much, and obviously they got rid of their coach in Peter Laviolette, who didn't really do much for Washington last year. I think they weren't very happy with the system that he played. And they obviously brought in Spencer Carberry, who was the assistant coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. So they're looking to see if he's going to be able to change the fortunes a little bit for Washington. But this is a team that, again, um, I'm uncertain about them. I think their top six is going to be okay. You know, top their top three is really good with Tom Wilson, Evgeny Kuznetsov, and Alex Ovechkin. Their second line, obviously, I think Pacioretty is going to be added there. So it's probably going to be Pacioretty, Nicholas Backstrom, and TJ Oshie. And then your third line is going to be Sonny Milano, Dylan Strome, and Anthony Mantha. And your fourth line is going to be whoever you want to put there. But I don't think their forward core is that bad. I think they've got a lot of guys that are aging though. Ovechkin, is he going to be able to score 40 goals and still be the Ovechkin that he's capable of being? I think so. I don't think he's shown signs of regression, but he is at that age now where regression is a possibility. Kuznetsov, a lot of talk about him potentially being traded. How happy is he going to be in Washington? Is he going to play to his best? Tom Wilson, who they locked up, I think he's going to be fine. Can he stay healthy? Nicholas Backstrom, again, not a guy who's at 100%. Is he going to be able to stay healthy for a full season? Pacioretty as well, another guy who is he going to be able to stay healthy? So there's a lot of question marks regarding the Washington Capitals. They have a lot of guys that are exciting. Dylan Strome, I think last year really, had a really good year for Washington, but they have a lot of guys that are very inconsistent. And then obviously, if you look at their decor, again, a lot of guys that are kind of at that point where are we unsure about them? Is Joel Edmondson going to be a guy who's going to be able to play a full season? And obviously they've had a lot of surprises too. Rasmus Sandin came in and played really well. Faravari has been an underrated defenseman for them for the last couple of years. John Carlson, who was basically on a Norris caliber season before he got injured. Is he going to be able to return to form? And then in net, you have Darcy Kemper and Charlie Lindgren, who, did pretty well last year, but weren't fantastic. And I think this team, there's a lot of the uncertainty factor. I think that's one thing with Washington. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of, are they going to be able to be fully healthy? And also, like I said, the age factor plays a big role in this because although Pittsburgh's an older team, I think they've made some moves that I think, still allow them to be a healthy team and still allow them to compete. Whereas Washington, they took risks in the both signings that they made in Pacioretty and in Edmondson, because Pacioretty played a grand total of 8 games last year, and Edmondson missed half the year from Montreal due to a back issue. So there's definitely risk, and for sure with Backstrom and with Ovechkin and with Kuznetsov, there's definitely risk. And so for that reason, I think they're going to be a decent team. I think they're going to battle for a playoff spot. I think they're going to be just in the running. They might get 40 wins, 41 wins here and there, but I don't think they have enough to make the playoffs. I think they're going to miss for the second time in a row. And I think for a lot of it's going to do with the fact that I think there's just going to be some regression. I think Ovechkin's still going to be Ovechkin, but I think just as a roster as a whole, I think they're gonna struggle to be able to be consistent for a full 82 game season.
Yeah, I don't have this as a team making the playoffs in the East, but I think as an organization, they feel they owe it to Ovi to just keep this thing going until
Yeah.
he decides to hang it up. And I think they're gunning for him getting another 50 goal season. They bring back, not bring back, but Backstrom, Oshie, Kuznetsov were big parts in that championship team are back, as well as a Tom Wilson. And you have nice pieces like Anthony Mantha, who struggles with consistency, but who won't be relied on too much in a third line role. And you got Dylan Strome, who's a tremendous top six center. And I think it's a good piece to have, especially with Nicholas Backstrom not playing a full season since 2019. You got Sonny Milano there. It's not ideal, but like you said, Max Pacioretty, they're expecting him to come back and be the Max Pacioretty of old, or at least the one that we saw at the end of his tenure in Vegas, and that's kind of the mentality behind that move, the Pacioretty one, and the Joel Edmondson move. They're looking to bring in guys that are going to help them push for the playoffs, and they're taking a risk with Edmondson because I think he had he was injured at the beginning, and then when he came back, I thought he really had a tough year in Montreal, but he's a guy who had good playoff runs with the Canadiens and with the Blues when they won their Stanley Cup. And you bring in Max Pacioretty for that same reason. You want to stay competitive. They're adding two veterans to a veteran core, so they're trying to keep this thing going. And if John Carlson is, because yes, John Carlson is that guy. He's still a true number one defenseman, one of the best offensive defensemen in the NHL. And the West, they'd be have a better chance of being a playoff team if they're in the East, because the East is really strong, and I don't think they don't. I don't think they have the depth, and I don't think they have the kind of guys that you could plug in if they have more injuries to Backstrom or Kuznetsov, or for example, to come in and step in and help this team right now. Because if you look at their pipeline, there's nothing going. I think the smart move for the organization would be to start a rebuild now, but you can't do that when you have a guy like Ovi who's still cracking 50 goals a season. So they're going to keep this thing going. There's not much in the pipeline, but they're trying to keep a competitive team together. I just don't think it's going to be enough for them to reclaim a spot in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they're gonna just miss out. Like you said, I think the fact that they're at a point where they're just, I think, keeping it just for Ovechkin at this point because they signed him to that deal and he wanted to be competitive in the playoffs. I think that's the reason that this is where it is. But besides that, I think Washington's at a point, like you said, where it's time for a rebuild. And I think that if they can start that sooner rather than later, I think it'll help them out further down. But they have some decent prospects. I mean, Hendrix Lapierre is a decent guy. Miroslachenko. They brought in Ryan Leonard this year as well. So they have some guys in the pipeline, but they need to obviously keep filling up their cupboard. And I think that for that reason, if they miss out on the playoffs, they might be able to get a top 15, top 16 pick that might be able to help them for the future. So I think they're going to just miss out on the playoffs. But I'm a big fan of Alex Ovechkin. I hope he has a really good year. And I hope for his sake that he gets closer to Gretzky's record. That's about the only thing that's anticipating about Washington right now. But besides that, I think they need to kind of just tear it down a little bit and start preparing themselves for life without Ovechkin afterwards. So I do definitely agree. I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add to that, Zach, before we call it quits. But yeah.
Um, Other than that, for this team, it's gonna be, you know, I don't know. It's gonna be another meh season. Like last year, they didn't make the playoffs and they were a couple of points out at the end. It's gonna be a meh season. Pittsburgh kind of had something along those lines last year, even with Gino healthy for most of the year and Crosby playing most of it.
Yeah.
But they made significant moves to really move the needle, and they new life with Cal Dubas and the players he brought in. And I think they're going to be back in the playoffs. And Washington, unfortunately, won't make it this year.
Agreed. Anyways, guys, please let us know in the comments down below. What do you guys think is going to happen in the Metro Division? Do you guys agree with our rankings? Do you think that our rankings are good? Are they bad? Where would you have some of these teams? Let us know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next episode of the Young Guns podcast. Thank you very much for watching.